Today on Bone Dry Retro, we're going to discuss why retro gaming sucks. Again, this is coming from somebody who loves retro games, but retro games suck. And one reason is, reason number three, the controllers. They totally suck. Maybe you remember fond memories of playing games on your NES, Super NES, even if you go back before that, your Atari, your Intellivision, ColecoVision, and those are in your head and it's all fantastic. But then you go to play them now and you play them the right way, and that is with the old hardware on the old controller. You were a kid, more than likely, or a lot younger than you are now, or maybe you've never played these games before and you're going back for the first time. I'm not sure which is worse. See, going back and trying to play things when you were younger, you're trying to recapture this nostalgia. You're trying to get this feeling that you had playing those games. And there's specific memories that you have, and they are designed a certain way, and you never can recreate that. You can only try. Or you've never played these games before, and you've only been trained on modern controllers, and now you have to untrain yourself to learn these older controllers. So, like I said, I don't know which is worse. Both are bad because they're not going to be what you expect them to be. So when you go back and let's say you pick up this, or something that looks a lot like this. This is the ColecoVision controller. There's the Intellivision controller. It also had the number pad. And then for some odd reason, the Atari 5200 decided to go with the same thing. But what do you do with this? There were covers for this and overlays, and they worked, I guess. The Intellivision controller was very similar to this, and I mastered baseball on it. There's no natural way this works. I mean, first of all, I like my joysticks to be in the left hand so I can tap buttons with the right if I'm going to play arcade games, which is what these were trying to play. For the most part, these are arcade games. The number pads were for other things, maybe for educational games, because at this time, and it's not much different, believe it or not, but at this time, the consoles were trying to sell themselves as computers or computer-like. And today, I guess they're trying to be multimedia things. But look at what happened with the Xbox One and that attempt to be a multimedia convergence system. It doesn't work. Do one thing and do it well. And game systems did do something well. They played games. But to include this was just senseless. When you go back and play these games, it's not going to have that same feel. You mastered this as a kid, and more than likely, you forgot the time it took to master it. You might only just remember the mastery. And now you've got to go back and start from scratch or unlearn what you learned about controllers to try to learn this. It's harder, I think, to do this than to, say, go from America to London, to England, and drive like a stick shift. Try and drive a stick shift from the right side of a car if you're used to driving from the left side in America. Very difficult. You're not going to get it right away. So that the nostalgia is going to wear off pretty quickly. And this is not the only monstrosity that exists out there. This style, this was a big one. First of all, look at the size of this thing. It's the size of a phone. I'm talking about an old school cordless phone, not a cell phone. It's tremendous. It's unwieldy. The action in this isn't so great. And not only are the controllers not going to be that great in terms of usability, but they're also going to not hold up so well. The clickiness, I can feel this one in here. It's already lost it a little bit, and I haven't used this that much, but it's got a ton of play in here that's not even moving, not even registering. This is another controller that you might encounter in your retro gaming. And I mean, it's tremendous. It has memory card slots, by the way, with a game with a hard drive on it. I don't understand that either. It adds to the useless size of this. And also look at the size of the Xbox logo on this thing. The buttons are in very odd places. They didn't master yet the sort of star design over here. It's a little off center. And these buttons, some of them don't even work. Again, another issue you're going to have with retro gaming is that some of your controllers are just not going to work very well. Now, there's plenty of replacements for this. But if you want the original feel, for those people that think there's only one way to play retro games, and that is the original way, then you should be playing on the Duke if you're going to play the original Xbox. Even the tiny little NES pad, it's an extremely limited controller. And I'm not trying to hate on the Nintendo controller. It was a great iconic controller for its time, but to go back to it now with those two small buttons and the small D-pad is difficult, especially again, as I've said, if you've trained yourself on modern controllers, or if you haven't played those games since way back in the day. Your hands are not as nimble as they were when you were 10, 12, 14 years old. So these are reasons why the controllers can really get in the way of your enjoyment of those retro games that you have this nostalgia for. And to go back further to the Intellivision controller, it's the same thing. Those games were hard to play, and it took us a long time to figure out how to use that controller in a way that made any sense. They had the inlays that showed you where to press, but you had to look down at that and not look at the screen, which we're not used to. Now we're used to having a controller that is ergonomic and is intuitive, that you just automatically know where the buttons are. To go to an Intellivision controller with a disc at the bottom and buttons on the top and then buttons on the side, you get all convoluted. Everybody jokes about the N64 controller. That's another one where you need almost three hands to use it because it just doesn't make much sense in how they designed that. There's too many buttons on that for the most part. It was like, okay, let's see how many buttons we can add to this to make our controller stand out from the rest. The Dreamcast controller is another one that is a bit unwieldy, and I believe that the Xbox controller, the Duke, was inspired by the Dreamcast controller. Yes, you had the VMU, and that was fantastic, but the controller itself is huge with one analog stick and the D-pad next to each other. I don't know why they didn't figure out to move that analog stick down to the other side. That would make things a little bit easier. The most important thing is here, retro games suck because the controllers, for the most part, suck. The industry had not yet nailed plain old usability. This is from a time when corporations made things and people made them work. Gamers today are used to their companies thinking about the user experience, thinking about how the controller fits in the hand and how that affects gameplay. And game designers, which are third party as well as first party, also have to incorporate the controller and how well it works and what button does what. And thinking of how about the player's hands can manipulate the controller in a way to make the game more intuitive and more interactive and more fun. And they didn't think about that back then. Back then, it was more about, we've got this console. Do you want it? Yes, you do, because it's the hottest thing out there right now. Your kid wants it. That's what it was about. They were designed for kids, and they didn't have usability so much in mind, sadly. So these are things that really get in the way of that enjoyment, that get in the way of playing these retro games. I love them. I always will. But reason number two why retro games can suck are the controllers. They're not as good as you remember them. You're not as good at them as you remember you are, and you're trained on the modern games and the modern controller. So going back in the past, although again, good for nostalgia, great to support the hobby, terrible in terms of gameplay because the controllers will not be what you remember them to be.